Hello, friends. It started out as just a regular day in August of 2019 when 18-year-old Austin Bohannon and his stepfather, Hubert, decided to go out for a hike in the Great Smoky Mountains. This wasn't anything unusual for the pair, and they actually did this quite often to spend some quality time together and to bond with each other. They started off on one of the same trails they always traversed and weren't too concerned about weather as it didn't rain much around this time of year. It was set to be a great day. Of course, they didn't completely let their guards down, and knew that they had to constantly remain vigilant, as things could change out there in the wilderness in the blink of an eye. They figured, however, that they had each other and would watch each other's backs should something happen and they become lost or, for whatever reason, disoriented or injured, unable to move forward. These are typical things one can't help but let tickle the back of their minds when heading out, even for a short day hike. And if you know anything at all about the perils of Mother Nature and her great outdoors, the two were also in search of something specific that day and found the right paths, trails, and signage which would lead them right to what they were out to procure. An unnamed plant which the duo knew would earn them at least $600 should they be able to get their hands on one. Who knows? Maybe, they thought, they would get lucky and end up with 2 or even 3 of these expensive beauties in their possession by the time their hike was finished. Now, they were also very aware that removing this particular plant from the park is illegal, but they weighed the risk against the reward and in the end decided it would be worth the risk. After all, who would ever have to know what they were doing there? It would look to anyone they passed on the way like they were just exactly what they were, a father and son hiking and spending some quality time together on a beautiful August day. Nothing to look at here. Hubert and Austin knew that many people, especially nowadays with such an emphasis on greens and all-natural diets, would be willing to pay up to $600 or even more for just one of these still unnamed plants. What could possibly go wrong? As they made their way along the creek, they ran into their first bit of trouble, though, as Hubert lost his footing and slipped, which caused his glasses to fall off his face and right into the water below. This was not good, as he was legally blind and desperately needed them in order to see anything a foot in front of his face. He let out a loud swear. Austin was well aware that they wouldn't be able to go any further, and if they tried, would be putting themselves in an even more dangerous and precarious situation, on top of the fact they were out there doing something they both knew was illegal. So, without a second thought, he decided to jump right into the water and start trying to locate his stepfather's glasses. Hubert carefully went into the water himself to help the young man search for them, but because both the men were looking down and not much at each other, neither realized that the whole while they were thinking they were just going to be waiting there in this creek until they located the eyewear Hubert so desperately needed. They didn't notice that as each second ticked by, they were becoming farther and farther apart from each other, becoming separated, essentially. They were both very focused on their mission, which was finding the glasses so they could get moving this plan of theirs to pilfer the illegal plant. Hubert's report stated that he hadn't even registered that he couldn't see or hear Austin. He was simply concentrating on looking into the water. When he had finally grasped that the 18-year-old was no longer within his presence, he didn't panic, not immediately. He just figured out that they must have wandered a little ways apart and it was no big deal. After calling out to Austin several times, though, and receiving no reply, he tried to find his way back to where the two originally entered the water. However, this was impossible to do because Hubert couldn't see right in front of him, let alone how many miles up or downstream they may have traveled. The strange thing here, though, despite not being able to locate his stepson, Hubert didn't report Austin missing until more than 48 hours later. When Park Chief Ranger Stephen Cluster got the call about Austin's disappearance, he wondered why Hubert waited 2 days before reporting the boy missing. While, admittedly, the Smoky Mountains are pretty remote, both Austin and his stepfather were experienced hikers. Austin was used to the wilderness. This time, though, it seemed he had slipped right off the map. Even when dogs were sent out and helicopters roared overhead, they couldn't catch a glimpse of him. It was almost like the mountain had swallowed him whole. Park Chief Ranger Steve Cluster had a bad feeling in his bones and thought there were several details in Hubert's story from the very beginning which seemed kind of suspicious or just not quite ringing true to him. He'd been involved in searches before, and he could sort of tell when someone wasn't telling the entire truth. Still, The park ranger continued to look over his map and pondered where the boy could be. Was Hubert actually to blame for his own stepson's disappearance? If not, then why had he not provided vital information until later? Ranger Cluster figured that something strange had gone on in the national park that Hubert wasn't discussing. However, he still put together a search party and went on the hunt for the boy. He figured if he could just find Austin, then he would most certainly be able to provide some answers. Chief Ranger was in charge of a team of more than 100 people who went looking for Austin. He also arranged for canine units to support them from the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, and helicopters were dispatched from the higher areas and ground for any sign of the young man. However, Austin seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Cluster became more concerned and was convinced that Hubert Dyer Jr. was hiding something about what had happened that fateful day. The search party continued to look despite the weather hitting a high of 90 degrees in temperature. 10 days later, though, and still no sign of Austin. Search teams and even the canine units had continued to search in, near, and all around the area where Hubert had reported he and Austin had become separated. But there was just no trace of the boy. Chief Ranger Cluster was concerned that something terrible had happened to Austin, but he hoped that he was wrong. He decided to go over the 6,700-acre area himself, but knew that time was slipping out of their grasp. At least it wasn't freezing, but still the young man must need sustenance. Thought, why weren't the searchers finding anything left behind? Why was there absolutely no evidence of the boy? When he asked Hubert to pinpoint the area, he said he wasn't exactly sure where it was, which Cluster also found very suspicious. Chief Park Ranger Cluster got in contact with Hubert once more and asked him to come and speak with him again. He knew time was of the essence, so he wanted to find out anything he could before he called off the search. Austin had now been gone for 10 whole days. Before long, they would be looking for a body. He hoped that by explaining this to Hubert, he would start cooperating and give the Chief Ranger the missing details, which he was sure were still being kept secret, though he was unsure of the reason. He was hoping to persuade him to come clean. This time, however, Hubert disclosed one piece of information that changed everything. He finally admitted to Ranger Cluster why he and Austin were really hiking in that area that day in the first place. It seems his fear of getting into trouble, or even being arrested, was affecting his ability to give the search teams and rangers all the facts they needed to conduct a proper search. Turns out, though, the plant was the key piece of evidence they needed, and in no time Austin was recovered safely. Hubert had simply not wanted to admit they were conducting illegal business that day, falsely assuming it would affect how well the search parties and authorities involved did their jobs. Plain and simple, he was scared of getting into trouble. Yes, but he also feared nobody would want to look for a kid who was there to steal plants for monetary gain, regardless of whether or not it was illegal to do so. Ranger Cluster found the area that the plants grow in and asked some of the other park workers where he could find it elsewhere all around the park. Once he received that information, that's where he focused his search, in the areas with highest concentration of this much-coveted ginseng plant. The Chief Park Ranger was also encouraging. Now that he knew nothing untoward had happened out in the wilderness exactly, he said that Austin's age was on his side and the fact that there were fresh water to be found throughout the national park. However, it was a concern that he had been gone too long. It had now been 11 days since Austin had reportedly last been seen by Hubert, while they were searching for the glasses and wading in the creek. Chief Ranger Steve Cluster had carried out searches before in his 20-year career in the Tennessee National Park, but not ones that had ever gone on for this long. He knew that he couldn't devote the manpower to the search for much longer, but he decided that they could make just one more attempt at finding Austin. Then, they might have to accept that he was completely lost in the wilderness. Austin had no idea of the search and rescue efforts being attempted all over those woods and trails just to locate him. Instead, he was trying to remember the survival theories that he had been taught throughout the years. He knew that he had to keep a clear head and not give up. When he first realized that he was indeed missing, he found some higher ground, knowing this would give him the best chance of being seen should anyone be out there looking for him. He was also trying to get some cell phone signal to be able to make contact with someone, anyone at all, who could alert authorities to his location, but to no avail. Austin knew he needed fresh water and fast. He knew that he could go without food, but not without water. He would have to go and find the source of the creek. He carefully navigated the ridge, following the creek along the bottom of the mountain. It was difficult to know where he even was now, let alone which direction he should head in. He was a bit disoriented after a few days of walking, and he knew that if he kept moving, he would stay alive, and that was all that was going through his head as he ventured deeper into the coverage of the mountains. As each day passed, Austin became weaker and weaker. He was starting to give up hope of ever being found or even making it out alive somehow on his own. Terrified to fall asleep at night, not knowing what kind of wildlife lived in this area of the park, and he was afraid as well of possibly not waking up at all or waking up completely disoriented, confused, and unable to continue on. Despite these fears, he knew that he had to keep his strength up, but sometimes wasn't sure how he'd go on. He had tried foraging for food, but with no success. His stomach had growled for a few days, but after a week, even that subsided. He figured he must have tapped into some sort of primal mode of survival. Thought of his mom most of the time and knew she would be extremely upset and worried. Austin was pretty far from where all the searching was going on and didn't even realize it. He didn't hear the helicopters overhead, and he wasn't near the river, where boats were trawling the river looking for his body, which they obviously weren't going to find. Canine dog units were running around the trees, seeing if they could locate him. Nobody seemed to be able to figure out where he was, and he had no idea that anyone was even trying to at this point. It's been more than a week, he considered to himself. Most likely they'll be looking for my body. Finally, on the 11th day of his harrowing ordeal in the woods, he heard the helicopter rotors overhead. He couldn't see them through the canopy of trees, but was overjoyed to know that there were people still out looking for him. He knew he just had to come up with a way to let them know where he was. He saw something just up ahead that made his heart leap. He saw a boat and some kayaks in the river. He mustered up as much energy as possible and called down to them. When the owner of the boat looked up, he knew immediately that they had been successful in finding Austin and they could bring him home safely. And that's just what they did. Austin was quickly reunited with his mother and stepfather and brought to the hospital for evaluation. He was a bit dehydrated and extremely tired and hungry, but would go on to make a full recovery. Austin is grateful to be alive and hasn't considered going in search of any illegal ginseng plants since. No charges were filed against Austin or Hubert, and they learned a pretty valuable lesson throughout all this. Well, there you have it, folks. Definitely, even though it is worth its weight in gold almost, don't hunt ginseng illegally in the national parks. You can go to prison. I look forward to your comments on this one, but please keep it friendly and respectful. Meanwhile, be good to yourselves and each other. I'll see you a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.